You're locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin.
You're tuned in to NightVision Radio, exposing the truth, one secret at a time. Prepare yourself as we explore the shadow worlds of suppressed history, secret knowledge, forbidden religion, and shine a light on the conspiracies to keep it all from us.
Para mi mamita que me quita mi popó. 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 Para mi mamita que me quita mi popó.
Welcome to NightVision Radio. Hey everybody, welcome to NightVision Radio. So happy you could be with us this evening. And we've got a great show planned, an interesting show. I can't wait to hear the story myself because my guest tonight says that he's solved the mystery of the Holy Grail, one of the most enduring and greatest mysteries of all time. So we're going to be hearing all about that in just a few minutes. But first, I want to remind everyone about the songwriting contest at returnofthetroubadour.com. The contest is underway. The deadline is coming, and they're looking for a song that uplifts the human spirit. And all genres are welcome. So go to returnofthetroubadour.com, check it out, because there's some great prizes. I know the grand prize is like $5,000 in gold coins. So it should be really, really interesting for that right songwriter. Please go and check them out, returnofthetroubadour.com, and like them on Facebook as well, because they know that music can change the world. And Lord knows we need some changing going on. But anyhow, tonight my guest is an Australian researcher and writer. He's calling himself Ron Pristarius, and I'm not going to out him unless he wants to tell his real name on the air. But what's really important is the information that he has to impart. And all you Rennies out there, listen up. And if you don't know what a Rennie is, you're probably not one, but hopefully you will be by the time this show is over. That's sort of a short nickname for people who are interested in this whole Rennes-le-Chateau mystery, Grail story, this all-encompassing big mystery. So, Ron, thank you so much for joining us. I'm glad we finally got the technical difficulties worked out, and happy to be speaking with you.
Thank you, René, and hello to you, and hello to all your wonderful listeners around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And your touch with interest, your posts about this information, and I have reviewed some of the information that you sent over to me. It's really interesting. Now, sort of to start out, just a reminder to everyone that this Holy Grail mystery was sort of inherent in the what we term the Rennes-le-Chateau mystery. The authors of Holy Blood, Holy Grail were pointing to that subject matter. They went off in one direction, and we thank them very much for their great work in sort of kicking off this whole publication of this type of information so that the rest of us could join in and join into the search. And people like Ron in Australia who are turning up evidence and information that's of interest to us all. So, Ron, you're talking about, in our conversations online, this is the first time we've ever actually talked directly, so it's kind of fun. But in our conversations online, you talked about all the evidence pointing into another direction, away from Rennes-le-Chateau, or I guess that's a piece of the story, but certainly there's much more. And you say that you found evidence of a map that points to this great lost treasure.
Yeah. What you have to think about is, can you hear me still?
Yes, I can. You're coming through
Okay.
loud and clear.
You have to think of places like René's Le Chateau as the terminal end of a much larger story. It shouldn't be viewed as the beginning. We have to sort of go back from René's Le Chateau to a common point. And once we realise that we've been heading in the wrong direction, we can sort of look at history and find out what's been going on. You're talking about the Grail. What would be the meaning of the Grail for you, René?
Oh my goodness, that's exactly was going to be one of my questions to you is, what are we talking about here? It's been said that the Grail, was a cup or a bowl that might have caught the blood of Jesus on the cross, that it could be the womb of Mary Magdalene, who some say bore the children of Jesus and so held the blood of Jesus. Others say that it's a stone, a Grail stone. I've had my suspicions that it might be a special stone that might be connected somehow to firestones or meteorites or asteroids coming from other worlds here. And that might be why it has some special meaning. But do I know what the Grail is? No, I don't pretend to. What do you say?
What we have to look at is to actually pin down a sort of meaning for it. And I might bore people here, but we've got to sort of get down between the difference between a quantitative description and a qualitative description. And a quantitative description would be how something is described, and it varies with language and meanings. And a qualitative description is what's the essence of being described here. So what I'll do is I'll read back one of Chrétien de Troyes' works and how he describes the Grail. And this is out of actually the Conte de Grail. And he's describing the procession of the Grail through the castle. And it says, handsome indeed were the attendants carrying the candelabra. On each candelabrum, then candles, at the very least, were burning. Accompanying the attendants was a beautiful, gracious, and elegantly attired young lady holding between her two hands a Grail. When she entered holding the Grail, such brilliant illumination appeared that the candles lost their brightness, just as the stars and the moon do with the appearance of the sun. Following her was another young lady holding a silver carving platter. Now, the word that appears in the Conte de Grail is Graal. It's Graal. And a Graal is the medieval French word for a type of ornate serving bowl or a deep dish affair. Between that description and where we are now, the meaning sort of changed with the usage of the word to become a sort of goblet in people's minds.
A chalice, yes. A
chalice. Also, if you have a look at the word candelabrum. Now, if I was in Israel and visiting, say, the Temple of Jerusalem and I saw the huge menorah, I would say, look at that menorah.
Right.
But the word used in the St. James Bible for the same thing is candlestick. And so...
Well, that's exactly what I thought of when you were reading that. I was thinking, I wonder if that's a menorah or the great menorah even that they're talking about.
And this has been the problem.
Are you getting at that the Grail or the Graal was a part of the lost treasure of the Temple of Solomon? Well, along with the Ark of the Covenant, the Great Menorah.
It would all be part of that, because if you look at what they're describing, and we don't look at the qualitative terms, we look at the quantitative terms of what's being described, we're looking at the furniture and the accoutrements from the original temple or the tabernacle. And what we're looking at is the sacrificial implements. We're looking at a bowl to catch the sacrificial blood. We're looking at a platter to present the sacrifice. And if you look at the stories around the time of the Conte de Grail, all those Grail history stories, they all talk about the same thing. we talk about a large treasure, a large Holy Grail, being guarded in a castle by warlike knights. And everybody already has the idea that these warlike knights are the Templars. In fact, Eisenbach describes it in his one as Templizing. So there's already a knowledge of what's going on. But between that date and this date, we've sort of lost the meaning of what's occurring because the words have changed. The quantitative description of what's being spoken about has been misread.
Now, when you're talking about the procession that you were reading about, what was the time frame of that writing?
Those Grail type stories. They all began around the beginning of the second millennia. We're talking around the 1300s, around that time. And it's around the time that we had the Templars operating in Jerusalem. And already everybody seems to know, and they talk about how the Templars were found or in charge or brought back some type of large biblical treasure.
Right. Now, are you calling the Grail the whole treasure, or are you referring to that bowl?
Well, I'm not particularly referring to the bowl. What we're looking at is probably a number of objects in one large treasure, and I don't like using the words treasure because that brings up connotation of treasure hunters, but it's the only word that can sort of fit. We're looking at a number of items that have all been conflated together under the heading of the Holy Grail, because the Holy Grail is actually a type of essence or idea that we have to look at, because as you described, one of the descriptions was that the Holy Grail could be the womb of Mary bearing the descendants of Jesus. That is another idea that comes into this, or the import of the treasure of the Temple of Jerusalem.
So when you're talking, you're saying the Grail is more of an idea. We use the term Holy Grail in a descriptive way today. We'll say, "Oh my gosh, I found the Holy Grail of whatever," and you use it to describe, you've hit the jackpot or you've got the ultimate thing. So when you're talking about the Holy Grail as a group of objects, basically you're talking about the ultimate find, if you don't like the word treasure, say. And are you positing that these items are the Ark of the Covenant, the Great Menorah, the jeweled breastplate, the the Grail, the bowl?
The Grail, the bowl.
The items that you're talking about,
they all form
one and the same?
They're all together forming one big type of cachet. And also the researchers identified a particular object within a treasure known as the rose. Whatever that is, it can't be determined at present because it's a little bit deep. But they've all been grouped together under the heading the Holy Grail, which was probably once originally believed to have been a bowl or a goblet or some type of chalice that was probably held by Christ, and originating from this original set of furnishings and accoutrements that was from the Temple of Jerusalem.
Wow. And is there something particular about the bowl? Why is it that the bowl has grown so much in legend? Of course, we've all heard of the Ark of the Covenant as well, and some of the other items aren't as well known. So why would it be that this bowl is, the subject of so many books, poems, works of art? What is it? Is there something particular about that item that you know of?
Well, it's not necessarily the bowl that's the important part. It's the whole group of the hoard of the cache, known particularly as the Holy Grail, or we should say the lost treasure of the Temple of Jerusalem. If you go back to the story of René's Le Chateau, that's actually what the target was being spoken about in the area. It's sort of changed now that they're looking for the Cave of Mary or a Stargate or something, but we're actually looking for, and it was described in the book by Gerard de Seed, it was a hoard of treasure from the Temple of Jerusalem that came to the area via Titus through Rome and then the Visigoths.
I wonder, I know Nicholas Haywood, who you know and are familiar with, and he was the purported member of the Priory of Zion that was in the film that I produced a few years back. He talked about a series of items that are kept together.
Yes.
That are irrefutable, incontrovertible. Is this what he means?
Precisely. What we have to do is... I was
trying to think at the time, what would be incontrovertible? What would be indisputable? Certainly documents could be disputed. Yeah. Just about anything could be disputed. Bodies at this stage of the game, at this many years later, could be disputed. But I imagine if someone really had the treasures of the Temple of Solomon, those would be indisputed or incontrovertible proof of something.
Well, if we can cast our mind back to probably a few thousand years into the tabernacle in the desert, it was when God appointed the first line of Davidic kings. The Davidic kings were to rule as God's representative on earth. If you can imagine, we call them the Rex Mundi, the kings over the terrestrial earth. Now, it's all right for them to say that they're the kings, but they have to have some proof of that.
King of the world, right?
Yeah. And the proof of that was to have, say, the Ark of the Covenant or the tabernacle furnishings, because the Ark of the Covenant was the residence of God on earth. And that was their proof that they were the divinely appointed sovereigns to rule over the nations of earth. Now, since that time, that tabernacle, or the tabernacle furnishings, has been the proof of the kings that they are the true legitimate sovereigns to rule over the earth. Without that, they can make a claim, they can say that they're king, but that is their certification that they are the actually divinely appointed king to rule the earth.
So, if I'm not mistaken, are you saying that whoever holds those items is basically in control?
It's not so much basically control, but they're able to use it as a type of certification that their claim of kingship is correct. Now, as you know, in the history of the European royal families, there's always been a hierarchy. The Habsburgs, from about the 16th century, were the most senior house. They were the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire. They were the kings of Jerusalem. And for them, this treasure was kept. That was their legitimate proof that they were the senior or the rulers of the terrestrial world. The next in line was the Stuart kings, and then we have from there downwards in seniority the other European houses. It's because of that certification of being a divine sovereign is why everybody has been searching for this treasure. But one of the problems have been over history is there hasn't actually been one group of this treasure. Because if you know the history of the Temple of Jerusalem, it's been looted a number of times over history, probably about 6 or 7 major looting events. It started off with the Babylonians, they took it. But each time the temple had been looted, it had been restocked with a new set of treasure, or the new set of furniture, I should say. Each one of these is indeed the treasure of the Temple of Jerusalem. But there's only been ever one that's been the correct one to certify who is the true divine sovereign on earth. That one disappeared very early in history, and it's recorded in it's recorded in the Bible. It's recorded in a lot of the Jewish Mishnahs that Solomon ordered the treasure in the ark to be taken from the temple and hidden somewhere. And we all seem to know that it was hidden under the temple, because people to this day are still looking there, and there's a lot of information saying it was hidden under the temple. And from the research that I've identified, this is what the Templars had followed to locate this treasure and remove it from the temple, and they took it back to Europe. And where it landed was somewhere in the area now known as southern France or northern Spain, which is exactly the area of René's Le Chateau. The difference between that and the story from René's Le Chateau was that they posited that the treasure in René's Le Chateau was the hoard that was taken by Titus. That was the last set of reproductive copies made for the temple. It is indeed a true treasure of the temple, but it's not the one that denotes true divine kingship.
So you're saying it was copies, a duplicate.
Well, they're duplicate in the fact it's not the original type. It was indeed treasure temples. They were made by the Jewish artisans at the time. They're correct. But as you know in history...
And these are the ones that we see depicted on the Arch of Titus in Paris?
That's it. The Arch of Titus, yeah. That's it exactly, yes. That's the last set of copies or furnishings that was made by the Jewish artisans for the temple after it had been raided and looted the previous time. History indicates that there's about 6 or 7 of these reproductive sets that have been made. They are truly the treasure of the temple, but they're not the original ones from the tabernacle. It's the original ones from the tabernacle containing the ark. You know, within the ark we have the tablets of the law, the blooming rod of Aaron, the breastplate. Those are the original ones that denote the true sovereign and the blessing from God to rule the nations. And those are the only ones that can be used to prove your divine kingship.
So I guess thus the reason why it's so well hidden is because what if I stole the treasure? Would that mean that I'm entitled to the kingship?
Well, it wouldn't. It
just means that I'm an imposter who's stolen the treasure.
Well, the history's also indicated there's been another people who've tried it. One would be most familiar would be Pierre Plantard. He put together a number of false genealogies, inferring that he was of the line back through the Merovingians. It seems that what his idea was hopefully to try and grab hold of the cachet and then announce that was his proof to be true royalty.
And Pierre Plantard, as some of the listeners know, was once purported to be the Grand Master of the Prairie of Zion. And I think he died, late 70s?
I think it was into the 80s he died. But having said that...
I think it was too.
Yeah. He's not the only one that's tried that same type of device on. There's been history of people claiming that they're they're divine or their descendants. And they're also been associated with searches to find this singular lost cachet. It's all been all the way through history. See, what the thing is, and it's still going on today, is that not only do you have to hold the hoard or the cachet of the original items, you must be able to prove your lineage back to one of the original tribes of Israel. Indeed, I'm led to believe that the English crown, the House of Windsor, is still trying to prove this to the day. This was very important for the medieval royal houses to keep this the best word is bloodline, or this line of pure blood that they could trace back to the original tribes of Judah to keep it within their family, that they were of that original line, so they could claim eventually that they were true divine sovereigns or kings of the world. Now, the Habsburgs did this. And as you know, history is littered with attempts to try and keep these bloodlines pure. One of the kings of France, their attempt was to marry Marie Antoinette, who was a Habsburg that was trying to seal the loss of the bloodline into the French crown. As I said, the English are still trying to do it. The Habsburgs were the original ones, and that resulted in a terrible occurrence back around 1700, and that was the death of Charles II of Spain. And Charles II of Spain was the result of close intermarriages in the bloodlines. From memory, it was 13 marriages of first cousins, somewhere in there. And he was basically a genetic mess. He died impotent, he was deformed, below intellectual par. And when he died, that was the end of the Habsburgs in Spain.
Now, when you were talking about Pierre Plantard a moment ago,
yes.
He was Pierre Plantard de Saint Clair.
Yes.
Someone in the chat room, Kathy, is asking about what about the Sinclairs? Where do they come into it? Is that a sort of a off the route because of Plantard, or is there a real Sinclair connection?
I couldn't tell you that because I've really nothing to do with the Sinclairs, because you have to imagine I was in Australia and I came from that direction. And over in Australia, we actually have a lot of history of searches for this particular hoard, or the Holy Grail. There's been whole expeditions launched into the Pacific looking to find where it was taken to. And it hasn't only been private people, there's been governments involved. The trouble is, it's only relatively recently, with the advent of the internet, that we're able to assemble all the information. And when we do that, we're able to get a large overview of what was going on, in particularly with searches for this particular hoard. As I said, one of the places that has occurred was René's Le Chateau. And you might say, well, no, it's not. It can't be. We've got a named person like Berenguer Saunier who found some documents. There's descriptions, what to look for. There's a treasure somewhere there. It can't be anywhere else. But the trouble is, when you come from another direction and not starting at René's Le Chateau, you begin to see a few more things. And one of them is that that's actually not a unique story. In fact, in part of the research, we visited all the places where the same story was being told, that a person had died. It's always a man. I haven't encountered that there's been a woman so far. He's leaving directions, sometimes a map, sometimes just verbal directions or incomprehensible directions to find some type of treasure. It's generally said to be a biblical or church treasure, and it's also said to be guarded by some type of society or hierarchy or something like that. The story of René's Le Chateau was found to be not unique at all. In fact, I could probably rattle off the top of my head 9 other examples of where the same story was being told, but the names, the dates, the locations were all changed. It doesn't mean that it's a fake or it didn't happen. It just meant that things had been slightly changed over time, that people had assumed that their area was the correct place, or they took the clues that they couldn't understand or misread because of the difference between the qualitative and the quantitative description, and tried to impose the clues that they had in the area they had. That's all it meant. But when we go back, and if we could probably do an exercise to go back from René's Le Chateau, we could then visit some other places where this occurred. We could actually follow the actual clues that was supposed to be followed from René's Le Chateau if we said put a line under everything that occurred since 1969.
Now, when you're talking about the Saunier story, those familiar with this mystery are very familiar with who that is. But he was a priest that was stationed at the sort of remote outpost of this little village of Le Chateau in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he purported to have found something of great value. We don't know whether it was a treasure or whether it was documents. Now, I did speak with a woman, an elderly woman in France who's not been made public, but she was the sort of adopted daughter of Marie Denarnaud, who was the housekeeper or, possible consort of the priest Baron Saunier. And she said that she helped Marie after Saunier's death and before Marie's death, obviously. I think she died in 1953. She helped Marie destroy some documents. And I said, oh my gosh. I said, don't you wish now that, you hadn't destroyed them? And she said, oh, no. She said, because they were against the church. And so I wondered very much, what it was that those documents were, but perhaps they did have something to do with the location of the temple treasure that we're talking about.
They probably did. But one of the problems is we found that they haven't been unique. Across the world, there's been clues, documents, copies, reproductions. It was one of the worst kept secrets in the world about a large treasure that got lost. In fact, we still hear it today in the echoes of it, that the Masons are in charge of some type of treasure. That's the terminal point we are now. And if you think that rumours or myths, they have some basis in history, all we have to do is find the original event that perhaps caused these legends or rumours, and then we recognise what's going on. We get the context of what's going on. And if we go from René's Le Chateau, one of the clues of René's Le Chateau is Pousson's Shepherds of Arcadia, his painting. There's actually 3 paintings nominated, Shepherds of Arcadia, Hermit St. Anthony, and some type of undisclosed image of Pope Celestine V. If you look at that, you say the Shepherds of Arcadia. Have you actually studied the Shepherds of Arcadia? I know everybody looks at it, but there's actually a message in it. And it's a pretty simple message once you stand back and have a look at it.
I have it hanging in my living room right now. Okay. Not the original, of course, but I have a copy of it hanging on my wall. I've looked at it many, many times, and of course, as so many people have. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar, the painting is by Nicolas Poussin, Poussin, if you want to look it up. It's called The Shepherds of Arcadia. And in the picture is a prominent image of a tomb and shepherds standing around it, including a woman. So now you're talking about there's a message in it, but the message that you're talking about is not the message that's inscribed on the tomb, which is Et in Arcadia Ego.
Yeah.
You're talking about something actually in the picture.
There's something in the picture, and it was a bit of a surprise for the prior assignments pointed out. If you look at the colours of the robes of the people standing in the picture, you have red and yellow and what appears to be white and black. They're just the colours of the Heraclean process for alchemy, the 4 symbolic colours. You might also notice that they're grouped also. Red and yellow on one side, the white and the black or dark blue on the other. That's a meaning for the conjunction of the opposites, the coni unctio oppositorum. And that is the actual meaning put into the picture by Nicolas Poussin. It was probably a bit of a joke played on Cardinal Ross Pigliozzi to hang on his wall, people would probably come in there and see this heretical alchemical message hanging on the wall and probably try not to laugh. But that relates in itself to the alchemical idea that the conjunction of the opposites is a master key. I won't get into it now because it's a bit vast, but it also relates to 4 ancient stars known as the tetramorphs, or the royal stars that mark the change of the seasons. And these are actually grouped in opposites, and their colours match that too, red and yellow, and the black and white. They're given colours. And that's a type of master key needed to find where this treasure was. And what I have to point out, we found a location where that master key was used to produce a latitude and longitude. We also found out that location had been visited many, many times since 1848. People using what was an original set of documents and directions, similar to the form that you've seen for René's Le Chateau, to visit this location and look for what, in all intents and purposes, is said to be a cache of the lost treasure of the Temple of Jerusalem. Now, one of the things, if you look at this, yeah.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I was just about to say.
Ready to say what I was going to ask about.
Who knows? The area is so big. One of the things you look at as René's Le Chateau is that we know of a few clues. We're given that the shepherds of Arcadia was a clue. Now, for some unknown reason, in the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, it was pointed out that over in England, there's a copy of this. It's known as the Shepherd's Monument, and it's in Shugborough Hall. Unfortunately, all investigation in the Holy Blood and the Grail amounted to about half a page. It makes mention that there's Shugborough Hall. Lord George Anson owned it. It was set up. It's some type of mysterious. There's a inscription on the bottom that's never been solved, but that's all it's ever went into. The problem being is that if you're looking at a set of clues, and one of the set of the clues is that Poussin's Shepherds of Arcadia is somehow important, realistically you should do a bit more investigation into any type of exposition of the Shepherds of Arcadia, in particular the one at Shugborough Hall. There's actually 2 in England. There's another one in a place called Esther Place, which is in Surrey. It's called Pelham's Urn, and that's another copy of the Shepherds of Arcadia. It's a stone monument. It was erected for the funeral of Henry Pelham about 1746. That one's not important. The important one is the one over in Shugborough Hall. Because when we look at another of the clues for René's Le Chateau, that some type of painting called the Hermit St. Anthony is also important, we find that Shugborough Hall had its own version of a 10 years painting, and it has St. Anthony in it. It's not an original 10 years. We know it was done by Margaret Coke. She was an accomplished artist, and she put an extra message into it also. And the message is a very, very badly drawn set of rocks, which is also a trompe l'oeil for a bear, the bear being the symbol for the Arcadians. So when you put them together, you have Shepherds of Arcadia, Arcadians, look to that. And we just step across the ditch, metaphorically from France to England, and we look at the Shepherd's Monument. Now, what a lot of people...
And the Shepherd's Monument, it's interesting to note that it's the same image as in the Poussin painting, but it's in reverse.
It's in reverse. One suggestion is that could mean nothing, because when people copied a lot of these monuments, all they could do was use engravings, and engravings were always the reverse of the original painting. It's just the way the painting process came out. They just bought a cheap engraving of, say, Poussin's original, and if you noticed, a lot of the engravings are in reverse. But the reason was the Shepherd's Monument's a lot taller and thinner, as it has a few additions to it. It was made to copy something else that we've already identified, and that was a Spanish map. The Spanish map suggested on one side a standing shape that looked like a woman. And so it's now known that the Shepherd's Monument was to encapsulate the details contained on this Spanish map and make it a permanent version so the information was never lost. Down on the bottom, the inscription, D&M, could be the standard funereal exectation to the gods, Dies Manibus, could also be degrees and minutes. Because if you think about to find something, you need three things. You need a starting point, you need a direction ahead, and you also need what you're going to find. So all the way through, we do need a starting point. And the starting point has always been there. In fact, the map we found was always there. We found 5 or 6 different copies of the maps. They all talk about the same location. The thing is you have to get the context of what is looked at. Once you identify the context, the clues become very easy. One of the clues or directions for René's Le Chateau is that particularly enigmatic phrase that begins "Shepherdess on the threshold, that puissant in 10 years hold the key of peace," and it ends with blue apples. Everybody's pondered over that for a while. What we did as an experiment was put that back into English, and then back into Latin. And we discovered that the words apples and blue could also mean sea and fruit in Latin. When it's retranslated back from Latin, we get that you solve it to get the fruit, south fruit of the sea, which turned out to be a South Pacific island. And believe it or not, since 1848, a number of expeditions have been heading towards a South Sea island looking for the treasure. When we went back to René's Le Chateau and looked at it,
Can I jump in real quick? So the reference to the blue apples, you're saying basically has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that every January 17th in the church at Rennes Le Chateau, the sun shines at a certain angle and puts blue apples on the floor or the wall. Does it have anything to do with that at all, or is that a clue at all, or is that just sort of a red herring?
It's just a sort of red herring that came about. The 17th of January, we actually found a report too that originated around 1762 after the death of George Anson. And the 17th of January was when an expedition launched by the British government to recover the treasure was actually on the islands. We did run an astronomical program for that date. It indicated at the South Sea longitude and latitude that the sun and a number of planets then all descended over the horizon in one big line. Whether that was a pointer or not, we don't know, but it seems to be some type of thing. That is what we understood that the 17th of January meant. It was the particular date that an expedition launched by the English government was at the location when everything went wrong. The trouble is there was a whole heap of stories that erupted after about 1762 that spread out across the world. And down where I am in Australia, we've even got our own versions of it. And again, they talk about the same thing, that a person died, they've left clues, directions and a map to find a treasure. It's some type of big church treasure. And we even tracked people searching for it in Australia. There's a place down in the bottom part called Queenscliff. And when we got hold of the Spanish map, we matched up the location there to the Spanish map. It all came back. One of the last places we had a look at was René's Le Chateau.
How do you feel that, as you noted, a lot of people have looked in the area of Rennes Le Chateau. There has been legends and stories that the Templar treasure of the Templars was hidden somewhere in the region, and people have speculated that treasure is the same treasure that you're talking about, the treasure of the temple.
Yes. Yep.
Is it possible that it was once there and has been moved?
That's exactly what happened. What we were able to do was trace the history of the treasure. We knew it was under the temple in Jerusalem. The Templars recovered it, and they took it to the area north of Spain, south of France. That's the area of René's shadow. In fact, they took it to a particular area that we call the 42-degree latitude. And the number 42 can be found in many, many places associated with many, many stories regarding this treasure. The particular thing about the 42-degree latitude is a unique astronomical occurrence there, and that is at the peak summer solstice, the sun and the moon form a 72-degree conjunction. Now, if you mark that on the ground, as megalithic man had done, those markers will then form pentagons because 72 degrees are part of the golden section. From what we understand, that was one of the main clues around the medieval times of the location of this hoard, that it was around the 42-degree latitude where the sun and the moon conjunct, and you can find references to that it was held in a castle by warlike knights, and that it was some type of treasure that was important to kings. Around that time, we do know that the Templars were moved against because King Philip wanted to seize that treasure. That was unsuccessful. From our understanding from the research, that the remaining Templars were taken into the Order of Santiago. That was Spanish military order, and it remained there until about 1714. We can trace the rumours of the treasures up until then, and then we come into the modern day times of the last movements of this last remaining cache of the treasure.
So you're saying that the Templars who remained, who were not killed, a lot of them sort of scattered is what scattered. A lot of people say, and
Yes.
then some went to and joined up with the Cistercians. But are you saying that mostly they went to Spain?
No, already in Spain there was Templars. It's when their commanderies all fell apart. They were absorbed by the already established Spanish military orders. And in particular, the Order of Santiago, which we're able to trace, because we know that the person who originally took the treasure around 1714 from northern Spain and moved it across the other side of the world, and that's one of the jokes, was actually a Knight of Santiago, and that's how we were able to trace how he had the treasure and how he knew about it. He was well known. His name was Captain General Don Juan Esteban de Ubilla. A few people may have heard of him because he died in the 1715 hurricane off Florida that sunk a whole fleet. But we were able to trace that he was the person that took this treasure away. And that came through the research of a millionaire businessman named Bernard Kaiser, who did extensive research in the archives of Seville about a treasure he was trying to find on the island of Juan Fernandez. What Bernard Kaiser didn't know was a version of the story he was following is also being told further to the west. It was told by some Polynesian natives who actually saw the ship. Also, the documents and the information Bernard Kaiser was following, from what we identified and what we can see, came out of the same source, that is the British Museum, that the story of René Le Chateau has come out of. And at the moment, we're looking at how the story of René Le Chateau came from England across to France. We think we've identified it that it came across by a French author named Robert Chiroux. He's probably not very familiar to some people, but he had his own little group at the time known as the International Treasure Seekers Club. There was a few eclectic people in it. And one was a person called Captain Tony Mangle. Another one was a cryptographer called Madame de Grazia. Another one was a French actress. That was Denise Carvain. And there's actually pictures of her and Robert Chiroux at René's Le Chateau. And when we went back and looked at Chiroux's book, we actually found direct references to this lost hoard that could have only been put in there by somebody who knew exactly what was going on. So at the moment, we're looking at Robert Chiroux was passed a lot of information, and he went across and planted it on Pierre Plantard, Gerard de Cide, a few things. Because if you remember, all the way through, Pierre Plantard said, the documents that you see for René's Le Chateau, produced by de Cherici, are based on something else indeed. And de Cherici himself said, it's all about longitude. And we all know that René's Le Chateau is basically, or the search for the treasure is on the Paris meridian, because they were searching for a meridian there. One of the clues that we looked at was that there was a series of documents, and it was talked about how they were taken to the International League of Booksellers at 39 Great Russell Street. And that was actually picked up by Bajan, Lincoln and Lee, that 39 Great Russell Street is opposite the British Museum. And what a lot of people didn't know, that back in the 1930s, there was maps published. They were published in a rather sneaky way. They were planted on a group of bachelors called Guy and Hubert Palmer over in England. And these maps, in fact, were based on the Shepherds of Arcadia. In fact, they were from Anson's Shepherds of Arcadia. And the shape denoted on it was actually a tracing of the shepherdess from the monument. What a lot of people didn't know also is at the same time this story was being put out in René's Le Chateau, down in Chile, another story was similarly planted. And this one had documents in the handwriting for the maps that again led back to Shugborough Hall, Lord George Anson and his monuments. They were both put out at the same time. People in France could never know the people in Spain. The people in Spain could never know the people in France. In Spain, the books were put out in Spanish. In France, they were put out in French. Never the two would meet. It's only now by the internet we're able to match up what was going on, who was going on, and what exactly was going on.
Now, you've taken us to the idea that the treasure was placed on an island.
Yes.
And then you're talking about the Templars joining up with the Spanish military, and
yes.
You're also talking about the gentleman who was coming to the New World. Is there a possibility that
yes.
this treasure has been brought to the New World?
All the indications was that it went further than the New World. It went further than the New World, way into the Pacific. The trouble is, when we started this investigation, we had a location and we had to see why were all these expeditions, and a lot of them were secret expeditions, turning up from there. So it wasn't a normal treasure hunt where we were given a set of clues and had to find a location. I had the location first. It was an island, we'll call island called the Horseshoe Island, and a set of group of islands called the Trinity. What we had to find was why people were turning up there, what was leading them to this particular location. Eventually it was worked out, because there was a lot of subterfuge and suppression going on of the information, that it all related back to a particular map, a Spanish map, a particular copy of the Spanish map, which was in fact the Shepherd's Monument, and a particular expedition that was launched in 1760 by the British to recover the treasure for the wedding of George the III to Princess Charlotte of Mecklenburg. In that, since 1762, when the information got out after Anson died, we found it had been copied endlessly. And in a lot of places, people couldn't understand what they were reading. And so they were trying everywhere they could to try and match the map, the directions, the location. And wherever they found a place that looked like the map or sounded like the directions or appeared to be the right place, they searched there. And in these locations, this is where a lot of the stories come from. Down the east coast of America, there are in fact a lot of places where there's versions or derivatives of the stories being spoken about. One of the places everybody is familiar with, and they're already familiar with now, that somehow Oak Island is related to René's Le Chateau. They just don't know why, and they say on it you might find the treasure of the Temple of Jerusalem, there might be a Templar treasure. There's a vague awareness. What they don't understand is why, and the simple reason is that Oak Island, actually in geographical shape, was the shape that Juan Fernandez Island looked on old naval charts. And when we took an overlay of the Spanish map, the copy of the Spanish map that we found, and we laid it over Oak Island, the location on the Spanish map where the treasure is supposed to be matches the locations of the money pit. And a lot of people don't know there was more than one money pit. There was about 4 or 5 major pits, and they all conformed to the location on the Spanish map where the treasure was supposed to be. But not only that, Oak Island wasn't the only place where this was attempted. There was other islands in the Atlantic where the map was overlaid on the shape of the island, which bore to some extent more or less a resemblance of the shape of the shepherdess from the Anson Monument, where people went to look for this treasure.
Now, yeah, that's funny because someone in the chat room had asked that same question. How about a connection to Oak Island?
Yeah.
And we always hear that. I mean, there are several locations that you always kind of hear in connection with the story. Oak Island, possibly Lincoln Cathedral, Roslyn Chapel. Those things there. But it seems like very vague connections.
They're very vague connections because a lot of the stories have been covered up. You have to go back to the originals, and sometimes it's a little bit hard to uncover. For example, everybody knows the story of Oak Island now as 3 people on an island. They see a depression, they start digging, they can't find anything. That's not actually the story at all. When you go back to the history, the story as originally told was that a person was walking on an island and they saw 3 trees in a triangle. That's one pre-modern day version. Another one, and it was actually a report that in 1870 a man turned up there and he had a map. And the description of the map was it was a very ancient map. It had lines on it around the exterior was in Latin. And he had to start from a position. He had to sail in the direction to find a particular shaped island. And I know the island that he was supposed to look for was a sort of a pipe-shaped island, which was, again, a copy of Juan Fernandez. And what we do know now that he was just another person. His name was Captain Allen. He had another copy of this map that had been circulating. And he's not the only one. There was copies of the map. There's another place up in Nova Scotia called Hort Island. And on the island there was some particular landmarks.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to take a quick break. But I'm so sorry, I'm so into this. We actually missed the first break about half an hour ago.
No, we didn't, did we?
Got into it. So
no.
Isn't that funny? So moments. Everyone stay tuned. You're listening to Night Vision Radio. And my guest, Ron Pristarius, we're talking about the Holy Grail. Stand by. Welcome back to Night Vision, everyone. I'm your host, René Barnett. Tonight, my guest is Ron Pristarius. We're talking about the Holy Grail. We're talking about the great treasure of the Temple of Solomon. We're talking about the Runless Chateau connection, the Shugborough Hall connection, all these other connections. We're exploring all the way to the New World and Oak Island and Pacific Islands and all kinds of stuff. So, gosh, Ron, we're down to like the last, looks like 23 minutes of the show, and it's just gone by so quickly. I was laughing during the break because I got so involved. I missed the first break and almost missed the second one. So, I mean, this is definitely a subject that I'm absolutely enamored with. So, in the end, at the end of the day, where do you think today that this treasure is? On that island?
No. Well,
yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, no. Somewhere down on what is a place we call the Trinity. Now, what we do know that there was a report sent back to George Anson. The report actually arrived after he died, and it was written by his commander called Cornelius Webb. In all the stories, he is the sort of the prototype, along with Anson and Abila, of the person who died. Because if you notice that all the stories say a person who died and left directions to find some type of treasure. And we've traced him as the archetype or the prototype of this person in the story. He sent back a coded report. It's been badly copied a few times. Parts of it appear in other stories. A little bit of it appears in the story of René's The Shadow. What we know, that was the last position of the sighting of a cache of this treasure of the temple. And according to the report, he left it either on the island where he found it because a tropical storm intervened, or another way of reading it, because we worked out the report was originally in Latin. The modern day copies of this report, they come out all backwards. You sort of get a blue apples effect. It doesn't make any sense what is actually said. When you put it back into Latin and you retranslate it again, you get the proper meaning of what's occurring. And the proper meaning says that it was either put back on the island where it was found or was moved close by. And the point it identifies...
Close by the island?
Close by in one of another island known as the Trinity. We haven't got enough time to go in expositions of the Trinity, but there was 3 islands together. That appears also in a lot of different stories. Either you look for a Trinity, or you look for a place called Trinidad, or you're looking for 3 mountains. It's either there or one of the islands. And that is the last known report. And we even have reports of major searches in the area trying to find it. People following this report, and what we're able to determine at around 1848, a group of 4 people visited the cache and took some of the gold away from it. And from then we get another group of stories coming out, and we trace their history back too. A lot of this was available down where I am in Australia. It just never seemed to be matched up to people to the other side of the world of very large expeditions, including British warships. We do know that there's never been any reports since then of any of the treasure surfacing, because if you can imagine, if someone turned up with a 6-foot gold candelabra, there'd be a bit of a talk about it. None of the items certainly have ever surfaced. And so we're more than confident that still in the area is a cache. There was one we know of that was a large group of gold that was taken from the Potosi Mint that was on the shipment, and another group in a smaller vault that's talked about of the remaining cache of some temple items. Exactly what they are, we're not sure. Certainly the ark wouldn't survive after all this time. It would probably be rotted wood. Some item in it called the rose, we're not sure exactly what that is either, whether that's some type of complicated metaphor, whether it's a stone of some type, because accordingly in the ark there was another item. It was a stone, a tiny stone known as the shammer, It might be that. It seems to match up some of the descriptions. We'll only find out if we can get and find out what this rose is. Until then, it's open to speculation. Hopefully, by my talking about this...
What do you think the small stone was? Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, what do you think? Can you give me more information about the stone, or is that all that we know?
Well, we're not sure. See, all the legends speak about some type of stone that fell from heaven. Emerald in colour. We know there's a matching stone to it in the Kaaba for the over in the Islamic faith. That's a black stone. Yeah. We think it's some type of stone.
And what about the Dome of the Rock? The Dome of the Rock is a big stone.
It's a big stone
over
too.
A big stone.
Yeah,
also black. Probably a meteorite.
I think this is some type of stone. It seems to be mixed up with the emerald stone that fell from heaven. Indeed, one of the inventories, and there was actually a number of inventories we found that listed what was in the cache. One of them, everybody would be familiar with Otto Rand and his searches. The person who wrote by him put together an inventory, and it talks about an emerald cup that belonged to Abram that came from the Temple of Ur. I'm tending to think it might be this emerald cup.
I see that someone had just mentioned a while back in the chat room, they were asking about, why was Hitler so involved in looking for these sacred treasures or these things. And when you mention Otto Ron was the archaeologist who was commissioned, I guess, by Himmler, wasn't it?
It was by the Reichsführer. Yes, he came under the Reichsführer's notice for his previous work, and he was off to Montsuga trying to find, in particular, this treasure too, because everybody was trying to get their hands on it. We even found reports too that people from Spain were looking for it still up around the 1930s. People had to really appreciate it. It's a bit hard now how well known and how many searches were actually being conducted for this same treasure, all following the same information. And maybe we think that this the cup, this emerald cup, is what's been conflated over time into the Holy Grail-like chalice that was held by Christ. We think it's that type of thing. Indeed, it was sought after, and that's probably what is the actual rose that's in the cache.
Yeah. And does that have anything to do with the Rosicrucian?
We never got into that far.
And the whole symbolism of the rose and
the rose, in the esoteric.
And esoteric thought.
And we haven't got time for that to go in, but when we broke into the codes are actually basically couched, and so did the report from Webb. They were using alchemic terms because everybody involved in it was actually alchemists, so they were using it as a universal language to talk to themselves. There's alchemic references in the report, and particularly in this rose. Whether it's a complicated metaphor, we're not sure, but maybe we'll find out one day. Hopefully, if a cruise missile doesn't come through my window from the Priory of Sion, everybody will start opening up on what they're holding, because you have to remember this is what we found coming from my direction way down in Australia. And what we do know is people are holding onto the information. There's maps out there we've heard references to. There's copies of the report we've heard references to. And if we can get everybody to actually unlock it instead of treating it as some great mystery that shouldn't be shared with everybody, and we'll probably end up unearthing what's going to be like a 6-foot gold menorah. And then the fun's going to start when everybody starts arguing who it belongs to.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, isn't it also said that, it's a belief, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if you know, that if on finding the temple treasure and the Ark of the Covenant particularly, that is going to then spark Armageddon or have something to do with...
I was hoping we weren't going to cover that. We don't want to shock it.
I'm hoping we wouldn't go there.
Oh no, that's one of those. You have to consider this. So we're going, when you look at, you've got a map and it's leading to the cache, and you're going, do we really want to bring this out? Because everybody's going to be so upset. Because you have to keep in mind for all the biblical references and the meanings of what may be the actual location of an actual Holy Grail. It's not, we've basically transcended from myth and legend into reality, because what a lot of the stuff I've been referring to hasn't been flights of imagination. It's been documented history of searches of British ships, of copies that we know that have appeared from the 19th and the 17th century. We found all the records, we found all the references to it. And there was indeed a time when we went, we've tried to debunk a whole lot of this theory, and we've ended up proving and finding records that a shipment does indeed exist. It was hidden somewhere. There is a map to it. Everybody's been looking for it. And now that it's now 2014, if we follow this, we'll probably end up finding it.
That would be amazing. I would love to see that in my lifetime. Of course, I don't want it to trigger the end of the world or anything like that. I don't want to see it that badly. But it would be nice. It would be amazing. Now, one of the reasons that I was talking about, asking you about whether or not it could have made it to the New World, was because certainly the Oak Island legends, but also
just one of many.
You mentioned earlier that the Masons, had this treasure or knew where this treasure was or regarding this treasure.
Yeah,
and I know that, the one of the, I guess, the greatest Freemason in America ended up going down and living in, that was Albert Pike.
Yes.
It ended up, he was on an expedition. He left the expedition down in the middle of Arkansas, deep in the Ozarks, where he then stayed and lived out his life. And he worked a lot with Native Americans in that area. And there are a lot of, Native legends. I grew up in that area of the country.
Yes. Yeah.
And there are a lot of legends about such things and about treasures coming over. I have one very close friend that is a small tribe called the Katuah Band of Cherokee Indians, and they have certain items which almost kind of sound like it might have been part of that, or at least items that have come through their hands. And I wondered whether or not, because there at that time, of course, and still really there were just acres and acres, millions of acres of forest land, mountains, and tons of caves and connected caves. So it would be a great hiding place. And I was just wondering if that would have possibly been the reason that Albert Pike decided to settle in that area. Maybe he knew something was there, or maybe he was guarding it, or maybe he was looking for it there. I don't know. I
think you'll find that he's probably looking for it, because another famous legend that we actually tracked down was known as the Beale ciphers, and another one of your contacts, Court Lindell, he was looking particularly in the Jefferson, and when we reverse engineered the Beale ciphers, we actually found the area being talked about. It's actually three mountains known as the Peaks of Otter, and the three mountains were a trinity, and so we were able to, even by the type of the code used and what was appeared in it, and the reference to that, the Trinity, in fact, when the Beale cipher was actually decoded, it gave a latitude and longitude for the Spanish map and a particular bearing to head for the three mountains known as the Peaks of Otter, which are a trinity. And I actually just recently showed Court Lindell that the Peaks of Otter are, in fact, a perfect equilateral triangle. And Thomas Jefferson was the person who surveyed that, and we believe that's where the start of Jefferson being involved in some type of Masonic or hidden treasure, because he, at that stage, we believe he was actually using a copy of this information that had been circulated in attempt to find the hidden cache. But again, that's
and where are
such
those
a big
mountains?
They're known as the Peaks of Otter. They're down in Bedford, Virginia, where the Beale ciphers are set. Yeah. And Jefferson actually surveyed them. One of them was he thought to be the largest peak in America. For a while, I discovered it wasn't, but I think it was 1831. Thomas Jefferson went and surveyed those mountains, and his name is actually one of the clues you need to solve the code and the Beale cipher, which turned out to be a fairly typical Masonic code, one of probably 3 or 4 of the same form. But once you know what you're looking at and how to look at it, you just do a simple addition, and it gives you a latitude and longitude for the copy of the Spanish map that we know was circulating at the time. But that's another big area to get into, because it's really such an area. How many places where we found copies of this map were being used, or copies of the directions, or a version of the directions, Beale ciphers, Oak Island, René's Le Chateau, Rosalind's Shadow, a place in Japan of all places. It's just stupefying how a copy of it got over there. Places in the Pacific, places even in, I think it's Yugoslavia have identified it being used now, as the copies all spread out since 1762.
Well, it's just so interesting. Now, this idea of the 3 mountains, so you've looked at that in different areas of the world, right?
We've found that in different areas of the world, yeah.
I see. Yeah, there were some mountains I was looking at in Arkansas now. I was looking at 2 mountains, but I'm going to have to look to see if there's a corresponding third one.
It's got to be very particular. It's got to be in the shape. They have to be in the shape of a triangle, and that was specified.
Right.
In a lot of the Masonic things that they talk about. It's maybe not the place to get into, but there was another misinterpretation between the word cerro in Spanish, which means cipher, and cerro in Spanish, C-E-R-R-O, which means hill. And so it was misinterpreted where it said the cipher of the 3 points, and that's another reference that appears elsewhere, got changed into the hill of 3 peaks. And so a lot of people, instead of looking for a longitude of 3 points, they then began to look for a hill of 3 peaks. But that's another branch of a Masonic idea that came off we were actually finding about. And actually, the person I mentioned, Robert Cheroux, mentions in his particular book that was seen to be forgotten about how that the treasure is to be found on the 3 points. Well, the 3 points. It's under the second point. And so it's, again, just another version of the qualitative versus the quantitative, because the point actually came down to point on a map. But hopefully we might talk one day about the Beale codes and how to decode them, because it's fairly easy, and we can all learn about the difference between the Cerro Tres Puntes, that's the cipher of the 3 points, as opposed to the Cerro Tres Puntes, that's the hill of the 3 peaks, and the problems that it caused across the world as people started looking for 3 mountains in a triangle.
Wow, gosh, we're down to the last 5 minutes, and I wanted to.
Not, are we?
Is there something you'd like to refer the listeners to online, or is there some where that they can see some of your writing?
They can if they do a Google search. All you have to do is type in Google, just type in the Great Lost Treasure. I'll come up. My website comes up as number 1. And you can take it from there. It's a rather ironic look at the history. Take it as seriously as you want. Take it not as seriously as you want, because you've got to have a bit of a sense of humour to realise what's going on. But in the end, if you can follow it, you'll get led somewhere and you'll find the Holy Grail if you really want it. And the trouble is, once you can't unknow what you now know. That's a line from Zardos for one of the listeners. But once you start, you can't actually go back. You'll never look at René's Le Chateau or Oak Island or Rosalind Chapel or one of the other places ever again in the same light.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I know once you start getting into this material, it's sort of hard to let it go. I know I said to Nick Haywood after we finished our film, he said, I just have a question. He said, some people were asking, will you carry on? And I said, oh, yes. I said, I'm not ready to let go of this now. And I said, or maybe it's not ready to let go of me. And he says, oh, yes. He says, I was going to say, it's not you who's got hold of it. It has got hold of you. And he was exactly right. I've seen people spend their lives looking into this mystery. I've seen people lose their minds looking into this mystery.
Oh, you have.
Because
it is so, it's so large.
Completely.
Volumes. Yeah. But you either can or you can't do it. And if you can't do it, it doesn't mean it's bad or anything. It just means you haven't got a talent like, people are good painters or writers or anything. Some people can just look at them and see what's going on. It's exactly what's happened here. You can either look at a painting and say, look what's there.
I'm happy that there are different people with different. That's right. Well, also, there's a lot of different people that are looking into this information that have different skill sets. I certainly do not have that, skill set about the geometry and the maps and all that, like probably you and people like Court Lindell and others have, and Henry Lincoln. But, I have, the ability to do a lot of research and sort of make connections. And I'm so happy that there are people like you and others that are out there doing the stuff that I just can't do. It's just not the thing.
Oh, it's easy. You can, it's just a way of thinking. But see, the problem with it all is that it's not like in the car park of René's The Shadow in the end. It's somewhere very remote, very far away. So people tend to shy away from it. But that's not the attitude. If you're adventurous enough, it's a good story too. Somebody's going to pick up and run with it, and eventually we're going to get enough of the consciousness so it'll be operated on, and hopefully one day we'll probably see the big menorah and whatever is the rose, because it's not that far. And with modern technology, we should be able to find it fairly easily. Yeah.
And the music's we have to end. The music's playing, and the music's playing, and it's playing, and we have to say goodnight and happy Halloween. Happy Halloween to everybody.
Happy Halloween.
Thank you, Ron
Goodbye.
Pristarius, for joining me tonight. It's been an interesting conversation, so much so. Yep, we missed all the breaks, but we don't care. Take care, everybody. Good night. Happy Halloween.
All right. Bye-bye.
Para mi mamita que me quita mi popó.